Last week, I spent a day visiting a shelter for homeless trans young people in Kampala, Uganda. Kampala is a city of about 7 million people, and it has no distinct center. It's made up of 7 hills that are very, very crowded with traffic, driven primarily by motorbikes, or boda bodas as they're called. As we left for the trans youth shelter, we drove down one of these hills, and the traffic got less and less and thinned out as we moved into an area that looked rural but is still part of the city. Nobody uses Google Maps here. Drivers know their way around pretty well. There are few street signs and almost no street addresses. When you get into a neighborhood that you don't yet know, you usually end up hopping onto a boda boda yourself or hiring one of them to guide you to where you're going, like a tugboat leading a cruise ship into a harbor it's unfamiliar with. We got to the trans youth shelter in an extremely modest neighborhood. We were led into the house. Like many such houses, it had a wall around it. It actually looked quite nice from the outside, but it was extremely modest once we got indoors. There was just a squat toilet. The 2 modest rooms that housed 6 people were quite crowded. One put 4 people on mattresses on the floor. And then there was a living room that had a bulletin board on the wall. And that's where the television used to be, until they sold it because they had to get money to bail somebody out of jail who had been arrested under the 2023 Anti-Homosexuality Act. There was a very modest kitchen, and what surprised me the most was that there isn't any even running water. The residents of the house have to take jugs like these to a community well and bring water back every day. Given that being trans can result in the death penalty, the young residents of the shelter did not want to speak to me on camera. But 3 of the managers were willing to do so, most of whom had experienced homelessness themselves and had come up in shelters at some point.
As queer people, we've been trying to redefine what the mainstream interpretation of a shelter is. So most people perceive shelters as something proximal to refugee shelters. They are always disastrous and always problematic, and people are just in misery. But from our end, we've been trying to change that, to see that shelters are beyond just residential spaces. They are spaces which are safe. So we've been transitioning towards understanding shelters as safe spaces where people can meet, people can interact. They could be spaces for mental health support. They could be spaces for interaction. You never know who you're going to meet, because most of these shelters are birthed from people's homes or people who used to provide a space to other people who do not have where to stay. So more or less like how the other heteronormative setting is, able to access the SRH or HIV preventive services, people for them to know that they can come and maybe learn a skill or 2 and come out a better person than they were. For us, as queer people, shelters most of us have grown up in a way in shelters. Most of us have been supported in shelters. We've had success stories of shelters where people who even have master's degrees.
One of the managers talked to me about the difficulty they've had in trying to do their work under the second Donald Trump administration and the devastating cuts that USAID has brought to Uganda.
Like the new guidelines we receive almost every day is all the non-discriminatory words we used to use before. Now, if you are funded by USAID, there are some words. Like, let me give an example, a word like GBV, you can't no longer
Gender-based violence, okay, yes, thank you.
The word trans, they no longer need to hear about it. And we had the DEI, which was cancelled by US government. This one almost like 50% was directed for we the transgender people. It was automatically cancelled. So when you look at the Western area, where USAID is no longer in existence, now they no longer get any service when it comes to health because of that closure. All LGBT-led organizations were stripped. They were stripped of that fund. So Trump policies has affected us like 100.99% because we are left alone.
Netherlands already declared some funding decline with regards to gender rights. I think the UK also announced.
And one of the managers talked to me about how one of the most difficult, important, and painful things they've lost since the USAID cuts is hope.
Personally, I'm losing hope because I don't know when this will end. I don't know if we shall try to push harder as we wait for the next 3 years to end. So I'm personally losing hope because even as I'm talking right now, the landlord is demanding us rent for the last month and this month, and we have tried to reach out to most of the funders, but they are just rejecting our requests. Second, the food issue here and the bedding is a challenge now. We have tried to write the donors, but some of the donors are saying that the Trump policies have affected them, so they cannot support our programs. So honestly, I'm losing hope. I don't know how we can solve this issue.
As we left the house, the residents and the managers greeted me warmly with hugs, and I felt very frightened as I realized that they actually had no food for that evening and that their rent wasn't paid for that month. I had traveled with several people in 2 cars, and we staggered our exit in the hopes that we would not draw any attention from the neighbors. One of the perverse things about the Anti-Homosexuality or AHA Act is that it creates something called the, quote, queer tax. It makes it so that employers can pay you half as much as your colleagues, or that your landlord can charge you twice as much in rent or even evict you because they know that you're queer or trans. They hold over your head something that could end in your execution so they can pay you less or charge you more. We hired a different boda to guide us out of the neighborhood and back to a different main road than the one we'd taken in, because we never would have found it ourselves. And as we drove and drove and drove, I remembered a story that one of the people at the shelter had told me. When they went to work, it was not as simple as people in the West might think, as a matter of hopping on a bus or into a subway, but they had to take a boda, some distance. It was not as simple as hiring a boda to take them there. They would hire one to take them to one intersection, and then another to take them to another intersection, and then a third to take them to their place of employment. They cannot afford for their work to know where they live, nor for the mere possibility of a boda driver finding out they're trans and being able to extort their employer, their landlord, or both. If you would like to support this or other shelters for LGBT people in Uganda, please visit the Uganda Minority Shelters Consortium.